be on our website after the event. And those of you who are supporting people doing a portfolio, you can also share this information with them. So why do we need to think about getting a portfolio together and getting it together in the right way? One of the reasons we need to do that is we need to make sure we've got a consistent approach across the whole region and across all the different types of portfolio routes that we might use. Having a portfolio of evidence is the way that practitioners can demonstrate their practitioner competency and capability. And we need to do that for the practitioner's safety and also for the safety of all our patients and clients that we see in advanced practice. And obviously, all of this money that we spend on advanced practice, it's a huge amount of public money, and we want to make sure that we use that money as effectively as possible. So, what is the expectation of someone who is gathering their evidence for a portfolio? So the expectation here is that all advanced practitioners who are doing a portfolio of any type, or any aspirant practitioners or trainees who are submitting portfolios, take full responsibility for creating and curating their evidence and getting it together. It's really your process as a practitioner. You need to submit it in the form that's required within the time frame that's required. And sometimes you're going to need to seek help and guidance, and you're going to need to ask some questions, and you need to do that in a timely fashion, not leave it to the last minute. And also, I think it's really important to say that as practitioners, we have to act with honesty at all times. So the evidence that we submit has got to be honestly gathered. It's got to fairly represent what we're talking about. And we've got to have due regard for things like confidentiality and GDPR when we're gathering our evidence and submitting it. So what is a portfolio? So I've got a couple of definitions here. The first two are just from the dictionary, and the third one's from NHS Scotland. So a portfolio really is sets of pieces of work that you gather together to showcase your abilities to your employer, but particularly in terms of advanced practice, a portfolio enables you as a practitioner to generate your evidence, record it, reflect upon it, share that evidence, and share your learning and your continuing professional development. And many types of portfolios are available, and I've just got a couple of different examples here. So there are some highly specialist portfolios that run alongside people's advanced practice MSc programs. So the FICM one, so that's the Faculty of Intensive Care Medicine, or the RChem one, which is the Royal College of Emergency Medicine. You might just be getting together a portfolio of evidence for your revalidation, or you might be doing it for your employer, for your appraisal, or in order to have your job reevaluated. There will be some of you, and some of you on the call may be doing this already, going through the Centre for Advancing Practices supported e-portfolio route. There are other portfolios, as the saying goes, other portfolios are available. And actually, it's really important to say today, I'm not going to go through any one of these particular routes. I'm going to be talking generically about gathering evidence for a portfolio. So I might allude to some of these, but I'm not going to be going through this is what it looks like, this is what your evidence has to look like, this is where it needs to go, just so that you're aware. So before we even start getting our evidence together, there's a couple of things we really need to think about, and I've called these fail to prepare, so prepare to fail. So the first bit of this is to really be cognizant of the fact that getting your evidence together and curating it is going to take time. It isn't going to be done over a weekend. It's not going to be done in a week. It may take you months to do. So you need to gather that evidence, you'll need to collate it and organise it, then you'll need to curate it so that it demonstrates what you need it to demonstrate. Now, you might have a fixed time frame to do that. There might be a submission date. So you have to really start with the submission date and work backwards. Give yourself plenty of time. So think about things like, how long is it going to take me to upload any evidence onto an online portal if that's where it's got to go, or to put it into a folder and make it look right if that's what you've got to do it. And then you've got to check that it's referenced correctly, and it's got to cross-reference across capabilities. You've got to make sure it's correctly presented. Real key things like checking your spelling and your grammar and your punctuation and that it reads right. You need someone to proofread it, then you might need to amend it and correct it. All of that stuff takes time, and that's often the stuff that we don't think about when we're trying to get evidence together. We think, well, I'll just gather it from my bag of evidence that I've got under the sofa, if that's someone like me, and I'll put it in a folder and I'll send it in, and that's a weekend's work. It really isn't. You also need to think about how long will it take your reviewer or appraiser to look at that evidence that you submit. So you need to make it as easy as possible for that person to read it and get through it. You can't just send them 25 lever arch files of evidence, and we're going to come to that a bit later on. You also need to build in some contingency time. So most of you will be working full time. You'll have family commitments. You might have kids or people that you take care of. You've probably got other stuff that you need to do. You've got life to live. And if you've got, say, for instance, 6 months or a year is your period of time that you've got to gather this evidence, you need to take into account that you might actually get sick in that time. You might need a week of sickness. So the first thing to say is think about the time scale it's going to take you to get all this evidence together and get it ready for submission. The next thing you have to think about is knowing the format and knowing the audience. Now, the format is so important. So for some of the highly specialist curriculums, and certainly for the supported e-portfolio route, they have a particular tool and particular templates and particular formats that you must use. So if you are using a formal portfolio route, like the supported e-portfolio route through the Centre for Advancing Practice, or the FICM route, or the RChem route, or some other formal route, you must make sure you fully understand the format you've got to use, the templates you've got to use. You need to look at all the guidance documents, and you need to ask people if you are unsure, because if you don't submit the evidence in the right format, it's not going to be evaluated. It's not going to be accepted as evidence. So really make sure you take time to read the guidance and submit that evidence in exactly the way it needs to be submitted. And certainly for those of you doing the supported e-portfolio route, there is an applicant's page, I can't think of the word for it, it's applicant's notice board that has all the information about how to submit your evidence there. So you must look at that. The second thing to think about is who is looking at that evidence for you? Who is reviewing that? What will they need to see? You are trying to paint a picture of yourself, of your competence and your professionalism. And are there particular things that the reviewer is going to need to see or to know? So you're going to need to make those really obvious. So think about, how does it need to be presented? Who is going to look at it and what do they need to see? And how long is it going to take you to get all that together? That's before you've even started. So let's get round to talking about the actual evidence. So you're going to need to map that evidence. You just can't collect a load of stuff, put it in a folder and send it off. You've got to get your evidence together and you've got to demonstrate that it links to things. So what does it need to link to? Well, for advanced practice, it needs to link to the multi-professional framework for advanced clinical practice in England, and that's on the Centre for Advancing Practice's website. So there's 4 pillars of advanced practice that we all know about, and there are 38 capabilities within those 4 pillars. So your evidence has got to map across those 38 capabilities. Now, if you're doing a specialist route as well, like FICM or RChem, there may be other very specific capabilities and competencies that your evidence also needs to map to. So you need to think about, where do I need to link this evidence to show that I am working at advanced practice level? Also think about your job role, your job description and the scope of your practice, because you also want to make sure that your evidence links to that. And that's particularly if you're asking for your job to be re-evaluated, or if you're having an appraisal, or you're submitting it for revalidation. So think about what that evidence has got to link to and be really clear about that. So at least look at the multi-professional framework. Your portfolio has to clearly demonstrate your role and your capabilities to the reviewer who reviews it. So here we have Pooh speaking to Wal. Wal is clearly very wise. So your evidence has to demonstrate level 7-ness. It has to demonstrate you working at master's level across your capabilities. So I'm just going to stick up some thought bubbles here for some things that make level 7-ness. And just so you know, I didn't create that term level 7-ness. That was in a lovely webinar that's part of the supported e-portfolio route. So that really helps, I think, to get you to think about it. So there are some things when you're working at advanced practice level that you need to be able to demonstrate. So working at advanced practice level is about demonstrating a really significant degree of autonomy, managing complexity, making complex decisions with patients and client groups, evaluating your evidence, evaluating your work and the decisions that you make, linking that to complex evidence, showing your skills at level 7, so a high degree of technical skill, but you also need to be able to critically reflect upon what you do, critically reflect upon evidence and research, and you need to show evidence of critical analysis and synthesis, which is, you know, taking stuff apart, putting it back together again to make a picture. You also are going to need to be able to demonstrate evidence of working for service improvement and innovation. How are you improving patient outcomes in the people that you see? How are you improving your service? And also looking at how you're working with all of your colleagues across the multidisciplinary team at all different levels of their development. How are you working with your stakeholders as a whole, with your patients or clients, your service users and their families? So when you look at those two things, so we now know you've got to think about the timeline, what that evidence has got to be submitted, what format, who needs to look at it, what is evidence, what it's got to map to, and the kind of things it's got to demonstrate. So now, can I just say, I can see someone saying, is it just me or do others only see the first slide of the presentation? I can see the current slide. It's moving for me. Okay, I think it is just you. So I'm just going to carry on. So you suddenly have this view of like, oh my goodness, I've got to get all this evidence and I've got to map it to all these capabilities and I've got to demonstrate all this level 7-ness. And your head can kind of explode and think, I'm just going to end up with thousands and thousands of bits of evidence. What am I going to do? What a minefield. So this is part 3 of knowing your evidence. So here I show the map of the 100-acre wood, and on that map you can clearly see where Pooh lives, where Kanga lives, where Rabbit lives, where Christopher Robin is. You can see the trap for the heffalumps. You can clearly see where everything is. So this is what you have to do with your evidence. You've got to collate it and curate it. You've got to draw a map of you as a practitioner of your evidence. So first thing to think about is, rather than having hundreds and hundreds of bits of evidence, what are some really key bits of evidence that demonstrate your capability? And you want to map that across multiple capabilities. So not just to one in one pillar, but across multiple capabilities and hopefully across a couple of pillars. And you can show real reflection in that and real narrative around why that evidence is relevant. So think about picking real key bits of evidence that show your progression and your learning journey, but map to more than one capability and hopefully across more than one pillar of advanced practice. You have to show the so what factor. So why is that evidence relevant? So for instance, if you just submit a certificate or some sort of evidence that you've attended a study day, well, so what? So what does that prove? So you need to provide some context for that evidence and some narrative, some real critical reflection around that evidence. I'm submitting this evidence. It maps across these pillars and to these capabilities. And the context of this is X, Y, and Z. That's why I'm putting in. I'm reflecting on this, and this tells me X, Y, and Z. So it's really about not just submitting stuff, it's explaining why that stuff's important, why it's relevant, why that's important to you, why it demonstrates your capability, and mapping it across so the reviewer can clearly see, aha, trainee X maps to these capabilities and I can follow the progression of that and I know why that's relevant. The other thing to think about with your evidence is triangulation. So not just evidence from one perspective, but from several perspectives. So let's say I run a clinic and I write a critical reflection of me running the clinic and I map that to several capabilities and I want to submit that as evidence. Well, that's just my perspective. I might also say, right, I'm going to get some feedback from my supervisor or my assessor. I might get some observations from my manager. I might have an assessment that was done as part of me running that clinic. I might get some feedback from a patient or someone from the service users group. So really think about, can you build evidence that gives a 360-degree view of you? And you could, of course, also use 360-degree reviews of you. And pick a variety of types of evidence. So not all the same sort of stuff. So you can have some case studies, some critical reflections, all kinds of different stuff. So the key thing is picking key bits of evidence that map across capabilities and across the pillars with some context and reflection around that, with evidence from other people to confirm really your evidence. So you're making a map of yourself. Make it easy to navigate. So particularly for the supported e-portfolio route and for things like FICM and RChem, those portfolios will say it has to look like this and it's got to go in this order. So just make sure you do it exactly as it needs to be submitted. But if you're doing a more informal type of portfolio for your employer or for your job appraisal or for re-evaluation, make it really clear so when the reviewer looks at it, they know exactly what it is they're looking at and exactly what it is they're mapping to. Don't make them have to get out a compass and find, struggle their way through your evidence. Make it easy to read. So here are some bear traps that you really want to avoid if you can. And so poor old Pooh is stuck in the hole in Rabbit's burrow. So just submitting stuff that has absolutely no context or reflection. That's particularly true of certificates. And I have done this myself when I did my PG Cert portfolio. I shoved a load of stuff in there thinking, oh God, more is more. And then the reviewer said, I don't know why you put these feedback sheets in from the people who attended your university training session. I don't get it. What's the context of that? So make sure if you're submitting stuff, is there context to it? You can submit evidence and it doesn't map to anything, or it's not clear what you're mapping it to. So if it's not clear, you have to make it clear. So there's no point submitting loads of evidence that doesn't map to anything, or it's not really clear and signposted what you mean this evidence to map to, what it's demonstrating, which bit of level 7ness is this demonstrating, which capability is this linked to. Another really key thing to think about is current evidence, and I've put evidence less than 3 years old or no more than 3 years old. Now, if you are going to submit any evidence that's older than 3 years, you have to really contextualise why that is relevant, and you really need to think about, is there no more recent evidence? So I'm just going to caution you on that. Using evidence older than 3 years has to really be very significantly contextualised for relevance. Not in the right format. If you submit it not in the format, it's not going to I'm going to start again. If it's submitted in the format that is not meant to be submitted, and if you're not used the right format, it's unlikely to get you anywhere. It's not even going to be reviewed. So use the right format. Don't just submit 25 lever arch files. That is a bit of a joke. Nobody would submit 25 lever arch files. But don't just think more is more. Let me shove loads and loads of stuff in. That'll be great. Makes it really hard for the reviewer to read. Just chews up all their time. And it's unlikely to be really great quality evidence. You could have picked some real key bits. And also submitting evidence that, one, doesn't really support the capability you say it is, and doesn't demonstrate level 7ness. So it might be nice evidence, it's just not for this particular thing, and it doesn't really demonstrate what you think it means to demonstrate. So really avoid those bear traps. Less may be more. So real key bits of evidence that are mapped clearly across multiple capabilities with some reflection and narrative and evidence of triangulation are absolute gold, and they will probably mean that you have to submit less evidence because it's a greater quality of evidence. Here are some things you really want to remember, particularly when you're using sort of data and evidence that's got names and stuff that's recognisable. Make sure it's anonymised, and those of you doing the supported e-portfolio route, there's very clear guidance about that. So really be remembering the GDPR considerations for that. Now, one of the things when I used to be a marker, I would say to people submitting work, at least make sure your spelling is right and your grammar and punctuation is right, because that is sometimes in an essay, it's 5% of the mark. And that's the difference between a mark of one grade and another. So make sure you've had it read for clarity, grammatical errors, typographical errors, punctuation. So you might get someone you know to read it who might not be an expert, and they can just read it to make sure that it actually physically makes sense. But you might need an expert to read it for the more expert bits. Have I actually got that bit right? Particularly if you've got a word count and you've had to trim it down, you've got the risk then that sometimes you end up with these sentences that no longer make any sense because you've edited them so much. So before you submit anything, get someone else to read it just for clarity. And I'll tell you as a marker, work submitted with spelling errors and basic grammatical errors just looks terrible. It makes such a poor impression of you. Don't start off on the wrong foot. Be aware of any word count limits and evidence limits. If it says submit 3 of this or no more than 5 of that, do exactly what it says on the tin. Whenever you're unsure, you must seek help. So that might be from your supervisor or your academic advisor. It might be from a specialist advisor. It might actually be coming to the faculty for advancing practice to ask. Speak to people who've done this route or a similar route before. Ask them what worked for them. What are your top hints and tips for being successful? But remember, your portfolio is a picture of you as a practitioner. It's not a picture of anybody else as a practitioner. So what worked really well for one person might not be such a great fit for you. So if you remember, when you submit an essay and someone hands you their essay and they got an A, just because they got an A for their essay doesn't mean if you copy that exact format and style of wording, you would get an A. So remember, your evidence is absolutely about you as a practitioner. Make sure it's painting a picture of you. So I've got a couple of brief examples of evidence here. These are from the lovely Heather, who allowed me to show these. I'm not going to go over these in great detail, but I'm just going to give you a bit of a flavour of them. So hopefully if I click on it, it will open. Let's see where it opens. I bet you it's going to open on a different page. I might have to. Is it opening? Ah, it is. Slowly, slowly, slowly. Okay, so this is a mind map. You might have had to have done a mind map before. What I really like about this is that it's really clear. So there are 3 things being discussed in this mind map: issues, actions, reflections. So they're clearly colour coded so that the reviewer could look at that and go, all right, all the issues are in black, all the actions are in red, all the reflection is in blue. Oh, and I can see the reflections are evidence. They've got some references with them. So that's a really nice bit of clear mind map evidence. I'm just going to minimize that screen. I'm going to come to a review record here. So this is a review record of some treatment for a patient. First thing you notice, it's completely anonymised. So there's nothing recognisable about this patient or the location there, which is exactly what you want. There's some key bits there really about what the practitioner was doing and what they've done, and some management with justification. There's some nice references there. There's also a bit of student reflection, and that's the so whatness for that evidence. It's like, I've done this, I took this action, the justification for this action or treatment was this. This is the evidence that supports that treatment. So what about this piece of work that I've done? Here's my reflection on that. And you would be mapping this to a capability or a competence. I'm just going to minimize that one and come to my last one, which is a reflective review. So this is a reflective observed clinical examination, so an OSCE. It's a summative assessment here. So it's nice and clearly laid out, so the reviewer could look at that. They would know exactly what they're looking at, the so what, the evaluation and the analysis. But you can see down the side here that Heather's clearly mapping this to something. So obviously she's not mapping it to the supported e-portfolio, but she's mapping it to the thing that she needs to map it to. So actually on that bit of evidence, I can clearly see what that's about. It's nice and anonymised. It's laid out very clearly. The so what factor is there, and I can see clearly what that is mapped to. So the reviewer could look at that and go, oh, this is about this. This is demonstrating this for this particular capability. So this presentation will go on our website, as will the recording as well. Okay, so before I come to any questions, I'm just going to let you know that we have one more webinar to go, and that is in September, and that's Good Governance for Advanced Practice, and that is on the 7th of September. So thank you so much for listening to me burble on for half an hour, 24 minutes, talking about this portfolio evidence and gathering your evidence. So I'm now quite happy to take any questions. So Heather has been carefully looking at the chat and she's going to feed some key questions to me.
Thank you, Emmy. That was really helpful, and if not a little embarrassing, seeing your previous work coming up on the screen. So I have been answering some questions as they've been coming into the chat, but there is one that I think probably could do with a little bit more from you, and it's does the mental health route have specific competencies? Now I'm assuming that that's relating to the e-portfolio, so I just wondered whether I've put in about the from the frequently asked questions about, you know, obviously once the allocated education provider has reviewed the application, they'll allocate a suitable portfolio assessor. But I just wondered whether you wanted to elaborate a little bit on that one as well, Emmy.
Well, I guess so. I'm just trying to think out the best way to answer that, really. I'm actually gonna have a small brain freeze now.
So yeah, I think, I mean, certainly from that perspective, it's like the e-portfolio is a generic portfolio. So when they are allocated, they are being allocated to HEIs and reviewers who actually have a knowledge in that speciality, and so are able to curate that evidence. So you will have your specific competencies relating to your scope of practice and your role in your clinical practice, and you need to guide your assessor, exactly like you were saying, through that critical narrative to be able to get them to understand what your clinical competencies are, because what they're looking at is, are you mapping to that multi-professional framework, which is a generic framework. So those nuances around your specialities are to do with how that actually fits and where you see that fitting within those various different pillars of advanced practice. So the short answer is there isn't a specific competency framework for you to map against it apart from the multi-professional framework, but that's how you create that story so that you can actually guide someone through that.
Yeah, and that's a really helpful answer, Heather. Thank you very much for undoing my brain freeze for me. So I think, yeah, it really is for those people doing like that generic route, that supported e-portfolio route. It's really about what is the scope of your practice in your specialised role, and how are you going to make sure that your evidence maps to those generic capabilities, all 38 of them, but with the flavour of level 7ness for your particular role in your particular speciality. And I can see one question in the chat that I'm just going to answer really quickly is, when is the supported e-portfolio route open for applications? We don't have an exact date. I expect it will be closer to the end of the year. It may be the beginning of next year. As soon as we know, we will let people know.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I was just going to I'm putting up, oh, someone's already put the web. Thank you very much, Aaron, for putting the link back in there again. Yes, you can access old recordings of all of our webinars, and the link is in the chat box there. So there's, yeah, both of those questions are the same about when the supported e-portfolio route will be open for applications. Let me just see, here we go. Do you have to be, this is a good question actually, and I think one that you can answer, Emmy, is, do you have to be prescribing for a certain amount of time before applying for the e-portfolio route?
Well, not all advanced practitioners have to prescribe, and I think that's one of the things that if it's key to your role, I mean, and some practitioners cannot prescribe, so occupational therapists can't prescribe, so it won't be relevant for every advanced practitioner that they have independent prescribing as part of their role. So that is not a deal breaker. So if you are not a prescriber, but you are working at advanced practice level, but you don't need to prescribe, or it's actually not part of your scope of practice, then it's kind of a moot point, really, if that makes sense. If you are a prescriber and you've done your independent prescribing and you are prescribing, then you can submit evidence of that, but you don't have to be a prescriber necessarily. So for instance, in some roles it's kind of a deal breaker if you aren't. So if you're an advanced critical care practitioner and you're in a profession that can't prescribe, that really is a deal breaker, because an ACCP really has to be able to prescribe. But other advanced practitioners absolutely don't have to prescribe. So hopefully that answers that question a bit.
There's another question that's come in, and Fiona's has responded to it as well, but I think probably a little bit more information is probably useful as well, Emmy. Rachel has put on, I'm currently a new advanced practitioner. How do I apply for the portfolio route? And Fiona's replied, if you're completing an MSc in ACP, my understanding is you don't need to apply for the portfolio. So do you just want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so if you're so those people who've just finished there, so I think it's from 2018 onwards who've done an ACP MSc, at the minute those people would not need to apply for the supported e-portfolio route. Some of people who are going to be finishing in sort of this year, in the next year or so, they will be on accredited programs. So if they're on an accredited program, the HEI will let them know at the end of their program, you've been on an accredited program, so you would be recognised by the Centre for Advancing Practice as being an advanced practitioner, and you'd get a digital badge. For those of you who've done a course starting somewhere from 2018 onwards, but that program wasn't accredited at the time that you started, the centre's looking at legacy accrediting those programs. That's not a quick process, and that's not good. They're not going to be looking at that till 2023, I think is the date I've got in my mind. For those people who've done programs of study before 2018, this is really those are really the people that should be doing the supported e-portfolio route. So if you've done an ACP MSc since 2018, that was a non-accredited route, you don't need to apply for the supported e-portfolio, just wait to see if your program gets legacy accredited. And if you're doing an accredited program, so if you're on an accredited program, you don't need to do the supported e-portfolio route, because you will be eligible for a digital badge from the Centre for Advancing Practice to say that they recognise you as an advanced practitioner. I think the really important thing to say is nobody should get really anxious about not having a digital badge, because advanced practitioner is not a protected title, it's not a protected role. So there'll be lots and lots of people working at advanced practitioner level with that in their title who would not be eligible for a digital badge, did their study some time ago. You are still advanced practitioners, so don't panic.
Thank you, Emmy. So there are some questions here about templates. Are there templates we can start to use to start our portfolio in preparation for it opening?
I would look, actually, in terms of if you're thinking about the supported e-portfolio route, the thing I would do is I would go onto the Centre for Advancing Practice's website and look at the supported e-portfolio page, and that will give you all the guidance there. Once people have applied and are successful, there's a whole load of work that goes on before and webinars that explain exactly the template you need to use. So what I would do in the first instance, if you're thinking about applying, is start looking at the supported e-portfolio page on the centre's website and start looking at all that guidance document and the frequently asked questions. And I would really start looking at your job role and your scope of practice and the multi-professional framework, and start thinking of just making a map, even if it's a fairly informal map, of what evidence you have or what you can easily map to, and think about where your gaps are, because that's usually the place where people are going to come unstuck. It's like, I don't have much evidence around that. That's what I need to start working on. So that's what I would encourage you to do.
So some other questions coming in there as well. Oh, and just to say on the e-portfolio, once you've actually been able to register to start, there are actually a number of different templates within the actual e-portfolio route that you can use, but you don't have to stick to those. There are, you can use your own as well. So I'm just looking down here. There's some other questions here. There's a question from Matthew saying, who will sign off portfolios? I'm assuming, Matthew, you're talking about the e-portfolio. So Emmy, do you want to answer that one?
So if you're doing specific portfolio routes, you will have you'll have the person at the HEI who signs off that academic part, and then you have your reviewers and confirmers. So and also if you've got like an assessor, they can sign to say yes, I can confirm this evidence. If you're doing the really specific routes like FICM or ARChem, it will be quite clear in that portfolio who needs to sign, what level of training or qualification they need to be at. I don't know if that answers your question. If it doesn't, I wonder if we need to unmute you, or you can just shove a secondary question in.
So Matthew's put another question for non-HEI routes.
So without not if I'm thinking a non-HEI route, that might be something for like your job reevaluation or appraisal or revalidation, then that really needs to be, so that could be an assessor or your clinical supervisor. So anybody working at advanced practice level should be getting clinical supervision anyway, regardless of whether you're a trainee or actually qualified. So that would be your clinical supervisor. So that could be a very senior advanced clinical practitioner anyway, someone with usually more than 3 to 5 years practice. It might be the lead ACP in your organisation, or it might be a consultant, or it could be a GP or a GP trainer. It really depends kind of what the evidence is, but it needs to be someone with suitable professional heft, actually, particularly if they're signing off against competencies at level 7. But I would suggest it could be your clinical, your workplace supervisor, which everybody should have one anyway.
Thanks, Emmy. So there's a question from Antoinette saying, would it cause a delay, though, if we wait to see if our MSc is recognised? Would it be safer to do the e-portfolio route?
Well, it's like potato, really. I mean, the absolute plan is to go back and look at those legacy programs. And the reality is, unless that program has really significantly changed, then the likelihood is that they really want to be able to legacy accredit them, because we're really cognizant of the fact that there are loads of people who've done these courses. We can't all just have them floating in the air. So my suggestion would be just to wait. The next supported e-portfolio route isn't going to open, I would suggest, probably till the end of this year, maybe the beginning of next year. So really, in terms of length of time, it's sort of potato. Now, you could, of course, you could just take the view, do you know what, I'm not going to wait, I'm just going to apply. But actually, you are committing yourself to sort of like a year's worth of work and gathering all that evidence together. That's not a short process, so you might just prefer to sit it out. My advice would be sit it out. You are still an advanced practitioner if you're working at that level. You're not losing anything. No one's going to come away and snatch your advanced practitionerness away from you.
Yeah, and I think that's good advice. So there's I'm just going to give a shout out there from Claire Osborne for anybody from Oxford University Hospitals Foundation Trust who are wanting to apply or have applied for HE supported e-portfolio route. Please get in touch with me, and Claire has put her email in the chat box. I suggest that is only the OUH lot. I'm sure Claire will not want to be inundated with emails from the entire Southeast region. But if people do have questions, obviously you've got our ACP inquiries inbox, which you are able to. Emmy, you were going to say something.
I was just actually going to say, for any aspirant supported e-portfolio route people, so anybody on this webinar who's thinking that's the route they might want to take, what you really need to do is be discussing that now with your manager and the advanced practice lead for your organisation or training hub, because you are going to need their support to do it, and you are going to need their agreement. So you need to start teeing them up now. There's no cost to them, there's some time involved, but it's actually a funded route. So they haven't got to pay for anything, but actually you absolutely need their agreement, and they will have to sign a learning agreement with you. So don't spring it on them, start talking about it now.
Donna Windsor has put down a question saying, how far back are programmes likely to be legacy accredited? I think
It's only from about 2018. So
Yeah.
if you've done a programme before 2018, you are going to need to go through the supported e-portfolio route, and that's the advice. And I think it's because the programmes before then, that was really, I think, before the multi-professional framework was released. So those programmes may not actually have been really mapped to anything particularly, and they will have significantly changed. So you would have to go down the supported e-portfolio route.
Yeah. And there's a question from Pippa to say, are there plans for the ACP title to be registered? I think Emmy will have quite a lot to say about this. If anyone can call themselves an ACP, that seems to negate the role.
Yeah, well, so there are always discussions about whether this needs to be a protected title or a registrable qualification. So for instance, I'm a nurse and there are things that I can register on my NMC stuff as well as being a registered nurse. So community specialist practitioner is a registrable qualification. Currently it isn't, and there are just discussions about that. Now the reality is, you're right, advanced practice is just a word. So the Centre for Advancing Practice recognises what an advanced practitioner is and what an advanced clinical practitioner is. And the reality is there are lots of people, I'm sure, working across the region who have that in their title, who aren't working across all 4 pillars of advanced practice and aren't working at level 7. Now, at the, because it's not a protected title, it's within the gift of the employer to give them that title. What I'm going to say to you is the Centre for Advancing Practice will not apply a digital badge to those people. So all the people going through accredited programmes, all the people who go through the supported e-portfolio route, if they are successful, will get a digital badge from the Centre for Advancing Practice saying, we recognise that this practitioner is able to work at this level, they've done a recognised programme or demonstrated equivalence, and they've demonstrated working at that level of capability. And actually that's your real kite marking and benchmarking for that. And if I was an employer and someone was coming to me saying, I'd like to be paid a band 8A, which is absolutely what an advanced practitioner working across all 38 capabilities would map to, I would be saying, okay, where's your evidence of that? Do you have a digital badge from the Centre for Advancing Practice? So that's kind of the in I would have currently. If it becomes a protected title, anybody using that title who isn't one, according to he, will not be able to use that title. So that's my answer to that.
So, Emmy, I think we've come to the end of all of the questions, and actually that's really timely because we are coming to the end of our time together, and I know that we've got a lot of very busy clinical people on here today. So thank you to Emmy for a really comprehensive and fantastic presentation. I think that's given people lots to think about. We are obviously here as the centre, the Faculty for Advancing Practice in the Southeast region to support you with your development. So, do contact your AP lead for support, but I've put our ACP inquiries email in the chat box as well, that you can actually send us questions via as well. Emmy, have you any final words of wisdom?
I've got a final word to say. There's just some details there. You should still be able to see my shared screen. So there's our Twitter handles there if you want to sort of follow me, Heather or Sarah. And there's our inbox there. I'm always really happy to answer any questions. Once we've tidied up this video a bit and got it all uploaded, it will be on our website, and I'll make sure that my presentation with its links is there as well. At that point, I'm going to stop recording